Loud setting. Good evening. Welcome back to what is probably our final session of Flatland, A Romance of Many Dimensions. As a reminder, this book is from 1870 something. It's old. It's surprisingly old for how weird it is. But, yeah. We will get picked up right where we left off. As a reminder, we were at the point where the square from Flatland, who's our main narrator, has had a dream about Lineland. So that's where we were in the middle of hearing about his interactions with Lineland. Section 14. How I vainly tried to explain the nature of Flatland. Thinking that it was time to bring down the Oh, goodness. Sorry. I thought I had that on silent. That is on me. My bad. Startled me as much as it startled y'all. Thinking that it was time to bring down the monarch from his raptures to the level of common sense, I determined to endeavor to open up to him some glimpses of the truth. That is to say, of the nature of things in Flatland. So I began thus. How does your Royal Highness distinguish the shapes and positions of his subjects? I, for my part, noticed by the sense of sight, before I entered your kingdom, that some of your people are lines and others points, and that some of the lines are larger. You speak of an impossibility, interrupted the king. You must have seen a vision, for to detect the difference between a line and a point by the sense of sight is, as everyone knows, impossible in the nature of things. But it can be detected by the sense of hearing, and by the same means my shape can be exactly ascertained. Behold me. I am a line, the longest in Lineland, over 6 inches of space, of length, I ventured to suggest. Fool, said he. Space is length. Interrupt me again, and I have done. I apologized, but he continued scornfully. Since you are impervious to argument, you shall hear with your ears how by means of my 2 voices I reveal my shape to my wives, who are at this moment 6,000 miles, 70 yards, 2 feet, 8 inches away, the one to the north, the other to the south. Listen, I call to them. He chirruped, and then complacently continued. My wives at this moment receiving the sound of one of my voices closely followed by the other, and perceiving that the latter reaches them after an interval in which sound can traverse 6.457 inches, infer that one of my mouths is 6.457 inches further from them than the other, and accordingly know my shape to be 6.457 inches. But you will of course understand that my wives do not make this calculation every time they hear my 2 voices. They made it once, for all, before we were married. But they could make it at any time, and in the same way I can estimate the shape of any of my male subjects by the sense of sound. But how, said I, if a man feigns a woman's voice with one of his 2 voices, or so disguises his southern voice that it cannot be recognized as the echo of the northern? May not such deceptions cause great inconvenience, and have you no means of checking frauds of this kind by commanding your neighboring subjects to feel one another? This, of course, was a very stupid question, for feeling could not have answered the purpose, but I asked with the view of irritating the monarch, and I succeeded perfectly. What? Cried he in horror. Explain your meaning. Feel, touch, come into contact, I replied. If you mean by feeling, said the king, approaching so close as to leave no space between 2 individuals, no stranger, that this offense is punishable in my dominions by death. And the reason is obvious. The frail form of a woman, being liable to be shattered by such an approximation, must be preserved by the state. But since women cannot be distinguished by the sense of sight from men, the law ordains universally that neither man nor woman shall be approached so closely as to destroy the interval between the approximator and the approximated. And indeed, what possible purpose would be served by this illegal and unnatural excess of approximation which you call touching? when all the ends of so brutal and coarse a process are attained at once, more easily and more exactly by the sense of hearing. As to your suggested danger of deception, it is non-existent, for the voice, being the essence of one's being, cannot be thus changed at will. But come, suppose that I had the power of passing through solid things, so that I could penetrate my subjects one after another, even to the number of 1,000,000,000, verifying the size and distance of each by the sense of feeling. How much time and energy would be wasted in this clumsy and inaccurate method, whereas now, in one moment of audition, I take, as it were, the census and statistics, local, corporeal, mental, and spiritual, of every living being in Lineland. Hark! Only hark!" So saying, he paused and listened, as if in an ecstasy, to a sound which seemed to me no better than a tiny chirping from an innumerable multitude of Lilliputian grasshoppers. "Truly," replied I, "your sense of hearing serves you in good stead, and fills up many of your deficiencies, but permit me to point out that your life in Lineland must be deplorably dull, to see nothing but a point, not even to be able to contemplate a straight line, nay, not even to know what a straight line is, to see, yet be cut off from those linear prospects which are vouchsafed to us in Flatland. Better surely to have no sense of sight at all than to see so little. I grant you I have not your discriminative faculty of hearing, for the concert of all Lineland, which gives you such intense pleasure, is to me no better than a multitudinous twittering or chirping. But at least I can discern by sight a line from a point, and let me prove it. Just before I came into your kingdom, I saw you dancing from left to right, and then from right to left, with 7 men and a woman in your immediate proximity on the left, and 8 men and 2 women on your right. Is not this correct?" "It is correct," said the king, "so far as the numbers and sexes are concerned, though I know not what you mean by right and left. But I deny that you saw these things, for how could you see the line, that is to say, the inside of any man? But you must have heard these things, and then dreamed that you saw them. And let me ask what you mean by the words left and right. I suppose it is your way of saying northward and southward." "Not so," replied I. "Besides your motion of northward and southward, there is another motion which I call from left to right." King: "Exhibit to me, if you please, this motion from left to right." I: "Nay, that I cannot do unless you could step out of your line altogether." King: "Out of my line? Do you mean out of the world, out of space?" "Well, yes, out of your world, out of your space, for your space is not the true space. True space is a plane, but your space is only a line." "If you cannot indicate this motion from left to right by yourself moving in it, then I beg you to describe it to me in words." "If you cannot tell your right side from your left, I fear that no words of mine can make my meaning clear to you, but surely you cannot be ignorant of so simple a distinction." "I do not in the least understand you." "Alas! How shall I make it clear? When you move straight on, does it not sometimes occur to you that you could move in some other way, turning your eye round so as to look in the direction towards which your side is now fronting? In other words, instead of always moving in the direction of one of your extremities, do you never feel a desire to move in the direction, so to speak, of your side?" "Never. And what do you mean? How can a man's inside front in any direction? Or how can a man move in the direction of his inside?" "Well, then, since words cannot explain the matter, I will try deeds, and will gradually move out of Lineland in the direction which I desire to indicate to you." At the word I began to move my body out of Lineland. As long as any part of me remained in his dominion and in his view, the king kept exclaiming, "I see you. I see you still. You're not moving." But when I had at last moved myself out of his line, he cried in his shrillest voice, "She is vanished! She's dead!" "I am not dead," replied I. "I am simply out of Lineland, that is to say, out of the straight line which you call space, and in the true space where I can see things as they are, and at this moment I can see your line or side, or inside, as you are pleased to call it, and I can see also the men and women on the north and south of you, whom I will now enumerate, describing their order, their size, and the interval between each." When I had done this at great length, I cried triumphantly, "Does that at last convince you?" And with that I once more entered Lineland, taking up the same position as before. But the monarch replied, "If you were a man of sense, though, as you appear to have only one voice, I have little doubt you are not a man but a woman, but if you had a particle of sense, you would listen to reason. You ask me to believe that there is another line besides that which my senses indicate, and another motion besides that of which I am daily conscious. I, in return, ask you to describe in words, or indicate by motion, that other line of which you speak. Instead of moving, you merely exercise some magic, art of vanishing and returning to sight, and instead of any lucid description of your new world, you simply tell me the numbers and sizes of some 40 of my retinue, facts known to any child in my capital. Can anything be more irrational or audacious? Acknowledge your folly, or depart from my dominions." Furious at his perversity, and especially indignant that he professed to be ignorant of my sex, I retorted in no measured terms, "Besotted being! You think yourself the perfection of existence, while you are in reality the most imperfect and imbecile. You profess to see, whereas you can see nothing but a point. You plume yourself on inferring the existence of a straight line, but I can see straight lines and infer the existence of angles, triangles, squares, pentagons, hexagons, and even circles. Why waste more words? Suffice it that I am the completion of your incomplete self. You are a line, and I am a line of lines, called in my country a square, and even I, infinitely superior though I am to you, am of little account among the great nobles of Flatland, whence I have come to visit you in the hopes of enlightening your ignorance." Hearing these words, the king advanced towards me with a menacing cry, as if to pierce me through the diagonal, and in that same moment there arose from myriads of his subjects a multitudinous war cry, increasing in vehemence, till at last methought it rivalled the roar of an army of 100,000 isosceles, and the artillery of 1,000 pentagons. Spellbound and motionless, I could neither speak nor move to avert the impending destruction, and still the noise grew louder, and the king came closer, when I awoke to find the breakfast bell recalling me to the realities of Flatland. Section 15. A Concerning Stranger from Spaceland. From dreams I proceed to facts. It was the last day of the 1999th year of our era. The pattering of rain had long ago announced nightfall, and I was sitting in the company of my wife, musing on the events of the past and the prospects of the coming year, the coming century, the coming millennium. Note: when I say sitting, of course I do not mean any change of attitude such as you in Spaceland signify by the word, for, as we have no feet, we can no more sit nor stand in your sense of the word than one of your soles or flounders. Nevertheless, we perfectly well recognize the different mental states of volition implied in lying, sitting, and standing, which are to some extent indicated to a beholder by a slight increase of luster corresponding to the increase of volition. But on this and 1,000 other kindred subjects time forbids me to dwell. My 4 sons and 2 orphan grandchildren had retired to their several apartments, and my wife alone remained with me to see the old millennium out and the new one in. I was wrapped in thought, pondering in my mind some words that had casually issued from the mouth of my youngest grandson, a most promising young hexagon of unusual brilliancy and perfect angularity. His uncles and I had been giving him his usual practice lesson in sight recognition, turning ourselves upon our centers, now rapidly, now more slowly, and questioning him as to our positions, and his answers had been so satisfactory that I had been induced to reward him by giving him a few hints on arithmetic as applied to geometry. Taking 9 squares, each an inch every way, I had put them together so as to make one large square with a side of 3 inches, and I had hence proved to my little grandson that, though it was impossible for us to see the inside of that square, yet we might ascertain the number of square inches inside a square by simply squaring the number of inches in the side, and thus, said I, we know that 3 squared, or 9, represents the number of square inches in a square whose side is 3 inches long. The little hexagon meditated on this a while, and then said to me, "But you have been teaching me to raise numbers to the 3rd power? I suppose 3 3 cubed must mean something in geometry? What does it mean?
Nothing at all, replied I. Not at least in geometry, for geometry has only 2 dimensions. And then I began to show the boy how a point by moving through a length of 3 inches makes a line of 3 inches, which may be represented by 3, and how a line of 3 inches moving parallel to itself through a length of 3 inches makes a square of 3 inches every way, which may be represented by 3 squared. Upon this my grandson, again returning to his former suggestion, took me up rather suddenly and exclaimed,
"Well, then if a point by moving 3 inches makes a line of 3 inches represented by 3, and if a straight line of 3 inches moving parallel to itself makes a square of 3 inches every way represented by 3 to the power of 2, it must be that a square of 3 inches every way, moving somehow parallel to itself, but I don't see how, must make something else, but I don't see what, of 3 inches every way, and this must be represented by 3 to the power of 3.
Go to bed, said I, a little ruffled by this interruption. If you would talk less nonsense, you would remember more sense. So my grandson had disappeared in disgrace, and there I sat by my wife's side, endeavoring to form a retrospect of the year 1999 and of the possibilities of the year 2000, but not quite able to shake off the thoughts suggested by the prattle of my bright little hexagon. Only a few sands now remained in the half-hour glass. Rousing myself from my reverie, I turned the glass northward for the last time in the old millennium, and in the act I exclaimed aloud, "The boy is a fool." Straightway I became conscious of a presence in the room, and a chilling breath thrilled through my very being. "He is no such thing," cried my wife, "and you are breaking the commandments and thus dishonoring your own grandson." But I took no notice of her. Looking round in every direction, I could see nothing, yet I still felt a presence, and shivered as the cold whisper came again. I started up. "What is the matter?" said my wife. "There is no draught. What are you looking for? There's nothing." There was nothing, and I resumed my seat, again exclaiming, "The boy is a fool. I say 3 to the power of 3 can have no meaning in geometry." At once there came a distinctly audible reply, "The boy is not a fool, and 3 to the power of 3 has an obvious geometrical meaning." My wife as well as myself heard the words, although she did not understand their meaning, and both of us sprang forward in the direction of the sound. What was our horror when we saw before us a figure. At the first glance it appeared to be a woman seen sideways, but a moment's observation showed me that the extremities passed into dimness too rapidly to represent one of the female sex, and I should have thought it a circle, only that it seemed to change its size in a manner impossible for a circle or for any regular figure of which I had experience. But my wife had not my experience nor the coolness necessary to note these characteristics. With the usual hastiness and unreasoning jealousy of her sex, she flew at once to the conclusion that a woman had entered the house through some small aperture. "How comes this person here?" she exclaimed. "You promised me, my dear, that there should be no ventilators in our new house." "Nor are there any," said I. "But what makes you think the stranger is a woman? I see by my power of sight recognition—" "Oh, I have no patience with your sight recognition," replied she. "Feeling is believing, and a straight line to the touch is worth a circle to the sight." Two proverbs very common with the frailer sex in Flatland. "Well," said I, for I was afraid of irritating her, "if it must be so, demand an introduction." Assuming her most gracious manner, my wife advanced toward the stranger. "Permit me, madam, to feel and be felt by—" then suddenly recoiling, "Oh! It is not a woman. And there are no angles either, not a trace of one. Could it be that I have misbehaved to a perfect circle?" "I am, indeed, in a certain sense, a circle," replied the voice, "and a more perfect circle than any in Flatland, but to speak more accurately, I am many circles in one." Then he asked more mildly, "I have a message, dear madam, to your husband, which I must not deliver in your presence, and if you would suffer us to retire for a few minutes—" But my wife would not listen to the proposal that our august visitor should so incommode himself, and assuring the circle that the hour of her own retirement had long passed, with many reiterated apologies for her recent indiscretion, she at last retreated to her apartment. I glanced at the half-hour glass. The last sands had fallen. The third millennium had begun. Section 16. How the stranger vainly endeavored to reveal to me in words the mysteries of Spaceland. As soon as the sound of the peace cry of my departing wife had died away, I began to approach the stranger with the intention of taking a nearer view and bidding him to be seated, but his appearance struck me dumb and motionless with astonishment. Without the slightest symptoms of angularity, he nevertheless varied every instant with gradations of size and brightness scarcely possible for any figure within the scope of my experience. The thought flashed across me that I might have before me a burglar or cutthroat, some monstrous irregular isosceles who, by feigning the voice of a circle, had obtained admission somehow into the house, and was now preparing to stab me with his acute angle. In a sitting room, the absence of fog and the season happened to be remarkably dry, made it difficult for me to trust to sight recognition, especially at the short distance at which I was standing. Desperate with fear, I rushed forward with an unceremonious, "You must permit me, sir," and felt him. My wife was right. There was not the trace of an angle, not the slightest roughness or inequality. Never in my life had I met with a more perfect circle. He remained motionless while I walked round him, beginning from his eye and returning to it again. Circular he was throughout, a perfectly satisfactory circle. There could not be a doubt of it. Then followed a dialogue which I will endeavor to set down as near as I can recollect it, omitting only some of my profuse apologies, for I was covered with shame and humiliation that I, a square, should have been guilty of the impertinence of feeling a circle. It was commenced by the stranger with some impatience at the lengthiness of my introductory process. Stranger: Have you felt me enough by this time? Are you not introduced to me yet? I: Most illustrious sir, excuse my awkwardness, which arises not from ignorance of the usages of polite society, but from a little surprise and nervousness consequent on this somewhat unexpected visit. And I beseech you to reveal my indiscretion to no one, and especially not to my wife, but before your lordship enters into further communications, would he deign to satisfy the curiosity of one who would gladly know whence this visitor came. From space. From space, sir. Whence else? Pardon me, my lord, but is not your lordship already in space? Your lordship and his humble servant, even at this very moment. Pooh! What do you know of space? Define space. Space, my lord, is height and breadth indefinitely prolonged. Exactly. You see, you do not even know what space is. You think it is of 2 dimensions only, but I have come to you to announce a third: height, breadth, and length. Your lordship is pleased to be merry. We also speak of length and height, or breadth and thickness, but denoting 2 dimensions by 4 names. But I mean not only 3 names, but 3 dimensions. Would your lordship indicate or explain to me in what direction is the 3rd dimension, unknown to me? I came from it. It is up above and down below. My lord means seemingly that it is northward and southward. I mean nothing of the kind. I mean a direction in which you cannot look, because you have no eye in your side. Pardon me, my lord. A moment's inspection will convince your lordship that I have a perfect luminary on the juncture of my 2 sides. Yes, but in order to see into space, you ought to have an eye, not on your perimeter, but on your side, that is, on what you would probably call your inside, but we in Spaceland should call it your side. An eye in my inside, an eye in my stomach. Your lordship jests. I am in no jesting humor. I tell you that I come from space, and since you will not understand what space means, from the land of 3 dimensions, whence I but lately looked down upon your plane, which you call space forsooth. From that position of advantage I discerned all that you speak of as solid, by which you mean enclosed on 4 sides. Your houses, your churches, your very chests and safes, yes, even your insides and stomachs, all lying open and exposed to my view. Such assertions are easily made, my lord.
But not easily proved, you mean. But I mean to prove mine. When I descended here, I saw your 4 sons, the pentagons, each in his own apartment, and your 2 grandsons, the hexagons. I saw your youngest hexagon remain a while with you, and then retire to his room, leaving you and your wife alone. I saw your isosceles servants, 3 in number, in the kitchen at supper, and the little page in the scullery. Then I came here, and how do you think I came?
Through the roof, I suppose.
Not so. Your roof, as you know very well, has been recently repaired and has no aperture by which even a woman could penetrate. I tell you, I come from space. Are you not convinced by what I have told you of your household and your children?
Your lordship must be aware that such facts touching the belongings of his humble servant might be easily ascertained by anyone in the neighborhood possessing your lordship's ample means of obtaining information.
What must I do? Stay. One more argument suggests itself to me. When you see a straight line, your wife, for example, how many dimensions do you attribute to her?
Your lordship would treat me as if I were one of the vulgar, who, being ignorant of mathematics, suppose that a woman is really a straight line and only of 1 dimension. No, no, my lord. We squares are better advised, and are as well aware as your lordship that a woman, though popularly called a straight line, is, really and scientifically, a very thin parallelogram possessing 2 dimensions, like the rest of us, viz. Length and breadth or thickness.
But the very fact that a line is visible implies that it possesses yet another dimension.
My lord, I have just acknowledged that a woman is broad as well as long. We see her length, we infer her breadth, and which, though very slight, is capable of measurement.
You do not understand me. I mean that when you see a woman, you ought, besides inferring her breadth, to see her length and to see what we call her height. Although the last dimension is infinitesimal in your country, if a line were mere length without height, it would cease to occupy space and would become invisible. Surely you must recognize this.
I must confess that I do not in the least understand your lordship. When we in Flatland see a line, we see length and brightness. If the brightness disappears, the line is extinguished, and, as you say, ceases to occupy space. But am I to suppose that your lordship gives to brightness the title of a dimension, and that what we call bright, you call high?
No, indeed. By height, I mean a dimension like your length, only, with you, height is not so easily perceptible, being extremely small.
Water down the wrong pipe. There we go. Much better. My lord, your assertion is easily put to the test. You say I have a 3rd dimension which you call height. Now, dimension implies direction and measurement, but measure my height and merely indicate to me the direction in which my height extends, and I will become your convert. Otherwise, your lordship's own understanding must hold me excused.
I can do neither. How shall I convince him? Surely a plain statement of facts, followed by ocular demonstration, ought to suffice. Now, sir, listen to me. You are living on a plain. What you style Flatland is the vast level surface of what I may call a fluid, on or in the top of which you and your countrymen move about without rising above or falling below it. I am not a plane figure, but a solid. You call me a circle, but in reality I am not a circle, but an infinite number of circles of size varying from a point to a circle of 13 inches in diameter, one placed on top of the other. When I cut through your plane as I am now doing, I make in your plane a section which you, very rightly, call a circle. For even a sphere, which is my proper name in my own country, if he manifest himself at all to an inhabitant of Flatland, must needs manifest himself as a circle. Do you not remember, for I who sees all things discerned last night, the phantasmal vision of Lineland written upon your brain? Do you not remember, I say, how when you entered the realm of Lineland you were compelled to manifest yourself to the king not as a square, but as a line, because that linear realm had not dimensions enough to represent the whole of you, but only a slice or section? In precisely the same way, your country of 2 dimensions is not spacious enough to represent me, a being of 3, but can only exhibit a slice or section of me, which is what you call a circle. The diminished brightness of your eye indicates incredulity, but now prepare to receive proof positive of the truth of my assertions. You cannot indeed see more than one of my sections or circles at a time, for you have no power to raise your eye out of the plane of Flatland, but you can at least see that, as I rise in space, so my sections become smaller. See now, I will rise, and the effect upon your eye will be that my circle will become smaller and smaller till it dwindles to a point and finally vanishes."
There was no rising that I could see, but he diminished and finally vanished. I winked once or twice to make sure that I was not dreaming, but it was no dream. For from the depths of nowhere came forth a hollow voice, close to my heart it seemed.
"Am I quite gone? Are you convinced now? Well, now I will gradually return to Flatland, and you shall see my section become larger and larger."
Every reader in Spaceland will easily understand that my mysterious guest was speaking the language of truth and even of simplicity, but to me, proficient though I was in Flatland mathematics, it was by no means a simple matter. The rough diagram given above will make it clear to any Spaceland child that the sphere, ascending in the three positions indicated there, must needs have manifested himself to me or to any Flatlander as a circle, at first of full size, then small, and at the very last very small indeed, approaching to a point. But to me, although I never saw the facts before me, the causes were as dark as ever. All that I could comprehend was, the circle had made himself smaller and vanished, and that he had now reappeared and was rapidly making himself larger. When he regained his original size, he heaved a deep sigh, for he perceived by my silence that I had altogether failed to comprehend him. And indeed I was now inclining to the belief that he must be no circle at all, but some extremely clever juggler, or else that the old wives' tales were true, and that after all there were such people as enchanters and magicians. After a long pause he muttered to himself, "One resource alone remains. If I am not to resort to action, I must try the method of analogy." Then followed a still longer silence, after which he continued our dialogue. "Tell me, Mr. Mathematician, if a point moves northward and leaves a luminous wake, what name would you give to the wake?" "A straight line."
"And a straight line has how many extremities?"
2.
Now conceive the northward straight line moving parallel to itself, east and west, so that every point in it leaves behind it the wake of a straight line. What name will you give to the figure thereby formed? We will suppose that it moves to a distance equal to the original straight line. What name, I say?
The square.
And how many sides has a square? How many angles?
4 sides, 4 angles.
Now, stretch your imagination a little and conceive a square in Flatland moving parallel to itself upward.
What? Northward?
No, not northward. Upward. Out of Flatland altogether. If it moved northward, the southern points in the square would have to move through the positions previously occupied by the northern points. But that is not my meaning. I mean that every point in you, for you are a square and will serve the purpose of my illustration, every point in you, that is to say in what you call your inside, is to pass upwards through space in such a way that no point shall pass through the position previously occupied by any other point, but each point shall describe a straight line of its own. This is all in accordance with analogy. Surely it must be clear to you."
Restraining my impatience, for I was now under a strong temptation to rush blindly at my visitor and to precipitate him into space or out of Flatland anywhere so that I could get rid of him, I replied, "And what may be the nature of the figure which I am to shape out of this motion by which you are pleased to denote by the word upwards? I presume it is describable in the language of Flatland?"
"Oh, certainly. It is all plain and simple and in strict accordance with analogy, only, by the way, you must not speak of the result as being a figure, but as a solid. But I will describe it to you, or rather, not I, but analogy. We began with a single point, which of course, being itself a point, has only one terminal point. One point produces a line with 2 terminal points. One line produces a square with 4 terminal points. Now, You can give yourself the answer to your own question. 1, 2, 4 are evidently in geometrical progression. What is the next number?
8.
Exactly. This one square produces a something which you do not as yet know a name for, but which we call a cube with 8 terminal points. Now, are you convinced?
And has this creature sides as well as angles, or what you call terminal points?
Of course. And all according to analogy, but, by the way, not what you call sides, but what we call sides. You would call them solids.
And how many solids or sides will appertain to this being who I am to generate by the motion of my inside in an upward direction, and whom you call a cube?
How can you ask? And you, a mathematician, the side of anything is always, if I may so say, one dimension behind the thing. Consequently, as there is no dimension behind a point has 0 sides. A line, if I may say, has 2 sides, for the points of a line may be called by courtesy its sides. A square has 4 sides. What progression do you call that? Arithmetical. And what is the next number?
6.
Exactly. Then you see you have answered your own question. The cube which you will generate will be bounded by 6 sides, that is to say, 6 of your insides. You see it all now, eh?
Monster! I shrieked. Be thou juggler, enchanter, dream, or devil, no more will I endure thy mockeries. Either thou or I must perish, and saying these words, I precipitated myself upon him.
Section 17. How the sphere, having in vain tried words, resorted to deeds.
It was in vain. I brought my hardest right angle into violent collision with the stranger, pressing on him with a force sufficient to have destroyed any ordinary circle, but I could feel him slowly and unarrestably slipping from my contact, no edging to the right nor the left, but moving somehow out of the world and vanishing to nothing. Soon there was a blank, but I still heard the intruder's voice.
Why will you refuse to listen to reason? I had hoped to find in you, as being a man of sense and an accomplished mathematician, a fit apostle for the gospel of the 3 dimensions, which I am allowed to preach only once in 1,000 years, but now I know not how to convince you. Stay. Oh, I have it. Deeds and not words shall proclaim the truth. Listen, my friend. I have told you I can see from my position in space the inside of all things that you consider closed. For example, several of what you call boxes, but like everything else in Flatland, they have no tops nor bottoms, full of money. I see also 2 tablets of accounts. I am about to descend into that cupboard and to bring you one of those tablets. I saw you lock the cupboard half an hour ago, and I know you have the key in your possession, but I descend from space. The doors you see remain unmoved. Now I am in the cupboard, and I am taking the tablet. Now I have it. Now I ascend with it.
I rushed to the closet and dashed the door open. One of the tablets was gone. With a mocking laugh, the stranger appeared in the other corner of the room, and at the same time the tablet appeared upon the floor. I took it up. There could be no doubt. It was the missing tablet. I groaned with horror, doubting whether I was not out of my senses, but the stranger continued, "Surely you must now see that my explanation and no other suits the phenomena. What you call solid things are really superficial. What you call space is really nothing but a great plain. I am in space, and look down upon the insides of the things which you only see the outsides. You could leave this plane yourself. If you could but summon up the necessary volition, a slight upward or downward motion would enable you to see all that I can see. The higher I mount, and the further I go from your plane, the more I can see, though of course I see it in smaller scale. For example, I'm ascending now. Now I can see your neighbor, the hexagon and his family, and their several apartments. Now the inside of the theater, 10 doors off, from which the audience is only just departing, and on the other side, a circle in his study, sitting at his books. Now, I shall come back to you. And as a crowning proof, what do you say to my giving you a touch, just the least touch, in your stomach? It will not seriously injure you, and the slight pain you may suffer cannot be compared with the mental benefit you will receive." Before I could utter a word of remonstrance, I felt a shooting pain in my inside, and a demoniacal laugh seemed to issue from within me. A moment afterwards, a sharp agony had ceased, leaving nothing but a dull ache behind, and the stranger began to reappear, saying, as he gradually increased in size, "There. I have not hurt you much, have I? If you are not convinced now, I don't know what will convince you. What say you?" My resolution was taken. It seemed intolerable that I should endure existence subject to the arbitrary visitations of a magician who could thus play tricks with one's very stomach. If only I could in some way manage to pin him against the wall till help came. Once more I dashed my hardest angle against him, at the same time alarming the whole household by my cries for aid. I believe at the moment of my onset the stranger had sunk below our plane and really found difficulty in rising. In any case, he remained motionless while I, hearing as I thought the sound of some help approaching, pressed against him with redoubled vigor and continued to shout for assistance. A convulsive shudder ran through the sphere. "This must not be," I thought I heard him say. "Either he must listen to reason, or I must have recourse to the last resource resource of civilization." Then, addressing me in a louder tone, he hurriedly exclaimed, "Listen! No stranger must witness what you have witnessed. Send your wife back at once before she enters the apartment. The gospel of 3 dimensions must not be thus frustrated. Not thus must the fruits of 1,000 years of waiting be thrown away. I hear her coming back. Back! Away from me, or you must go with me, whether you know not, into the land of 3 dimensions." "Fool! Madman! Irregular!" I exclaimed. "Never will I release thee. Thou shalt pay the penalty of thine impostures." "Ha! Is it come to this?" thundered the stranger. "Then meet your fate. Out of your plane you go. Once, twice, thrice, 'tis done." Section 18. How I Came to Spaceland, and What I Saw There. An unspeakable horror seized me. There was a darkness, then a dizzy, sickening sensation of sight that was not like seeing. I saw a line that was no line, space that was not space. I was myself and not myself. When I could find voice, I shrieked aloud in agony. "Either this is madness or it is hell." "It is neither," calmly replied the voice of the sphere. "It is knowledge. It is 3 dimensions. Open your eye once again and try to look steadily." I looked, and behold, a new world. There stood before me, visibly incorporate, all that I had before inferred, conjectured, dreamed of, perfect circular beauty. What seemed the center of the stranger's form lay open to my view, yet I could see no heart, nor lungs, nor arteries, only a beautiful, harmonious something, for which I had no words, but you, my readers in Spaceland, would call it the surface of the sphere. Prostrating myself mentally before my guide, I cried, "How is it, O divine ideal of consummate loveliness and wisdom, that I see thy inside, and yet I cannot discern thy heart, thy lungs, thy arteries, thy liver?" "What do you think you see? You see not," he replied. "It is not given to you, nor to any other being, to behold my internal parts. I am of a different order of beings from those in Flatland. Were I a circle, you could discern my intestines, but I am a being, composed, as I told you before, of many circles. The many in the one called in this country a sphere. And just as the outside of a cube is a square, so the outside of a sphere represents the appearance of a circle." Bewildered though I was by my teacher's enigmatic utterance, I no longer chafed against it, but worshipped him in silent adoration. He continued, with more mildness in his voice, "Distress not yourself if you cannot at first understand the deeper mysteries of Spaceland. By degrees they will dawn upon you. Let us begin by casting back a glance at the region whence you came. Return with me a while to the plains of Flatland, and I will show you that which you have often reasoned and thought about, but never seen with the sense of sight of visible angle." "Impossible!" I cried, but the sphere leading the way I followed as if in a dream, till once more his voice arrested me. "Look yonder, and behold your own pentagonal house, and all its inmates." I looked below and saw with my physical eyes all the domestic individuality which I had hitherto merely inferred with the understanding, and how poor and shadowy was the inferred conjecture in my comparison and the reality which I now beheld. My 4 sons, calmly asleep in the northwestern rooms, my 2 orphan grandsons to the south, the servants, the butler, my daughter, all in their several apartments. Only my affectionate wife, alarmed by my continued absence, had quitted her room and was roving up and down the hall, anxiously awaiting my return. Also the page, aroused by my cries, had left his room, and under pretext of ascertaining whether I had fallen somewhere in a faint, was prying into the cabinet in my study. All this I could now see, not merely infer, and as we came nearer and nearer I could discern even the contents of my cabinet, and the 2 chests of gold, and the tables of which the sphere had made mention. Touched by my wife's distress, I would have sprung downward to reassure her, but I found myself incapable of motion. "Trouble yourself not about your wife," said my guide. "She will not be long left in anxiety. Meantime, let us take a survey of Flatland." Once more, I felt myself rising through space. It was even as the sphere had said. The further we receded from the object we beheld, the longer became the field of vision. My native city, with the interior of every house and every creature therein, lay open to my view in miniature. We mounted higher and low. The secrets of the north, the depths of the mines, and the inmost caverns of the hills were bared before me. Awestruck at the sight of the mysteries of the earth thus unveiled before my unworthy eye, I said to my companion, "Behold, I am become as a god. For the wise men in our country say that to see all things, or as they express it, omnividence, is the attribute of God alone." There was something of scorn in the voice of my teacher as he made answer, "Is it so indeed? Then the very pickpockets and cutthroats of my country are to be worshipped by your wise men as being gods, for there is not one of them that does not see as much as you see now. But trust me, your wise men are wrong." "Then is omnividence the attribute of others besides gods?" "I do not know, but if a pickpocket or a cutthroat of our country can see everything that is in your country, surely that is no reason why the pickpocket or cutthroat should be accepted by you as a god. This omnividence, as you call it, is not a common word in Spaceland. Does it make you more just, more merciful, less selfish, more loving? Not in the least. Then how does it make you more divine?" "More merciful, more loving. But these are the qualities of women. And we know that a circle is a higher being than a straight line, in so far as knowledge and wisdom are more to be esteemed than mere affection." "It is not for me to classify human faculties according to merit. Yet many of the best and wisest in Spaceland think more of the affections than of the understanding, more of your despised straight lines than of your belauded circles. But enough of this. Look yonder. Do you know that building?" I looked, and afar off I saw an immense polygonal structure in which I recognized the General Assembly Hall of the States of Flatland, surrounded by dense lines of pentagonal buildings at right angles to each other, which I knew to be the streets, and perceived that I was approaching the great metropolis. "Here we descend," said my guide. It was now morning, the 1st hour of the 1st day of the 2000th year of our era. Acting as was their wont in strict accordance with precedents, the highest circles of the realm were meeting in solemn conclave as they had met on the 1st hour of the 1st day of the year 1000, and also on the 1st hour of the 1st day of the year 0. The minutes of the previous meeting were now read by one whom I at once recognized as my brother, a perfectly symmetrical square, and the chief clerk of the High Council. It was found recorded on each occasion that, whereas the states had been troubled by divers ill-intentioned persons, pretending to have received revelations from another world, and professing to produce demonstrations whereby they had instigated to frenzy that both themselves and others, it had been for this cause unanimously resolved by the Grand Council that on the 1st day of each millenary, special instructions were made by him of that day's I think I lost it. Oh, here we go. I don't know what happened. It went forward like 4 pages. It had been for this cause unanimously resolved by the Grand Council that on the first day of each millenary special injunctions be sent to the prefects in the several districts of Flatland to make strict search for such misguided persons, and without formality of mathematical examination to destroy all such as were isosceles of any degree, to scourge and imprison any regular triangle, to cause any square or pentagon to be sent to the district asylum, and to arrest anyone of higher rank, sending him straightway to the capital to be examined and judged by the council. You hear your fate, said the sphere to me, while the council was passing for the 3rd time the formal resolution. Death or imprisonment awaits the apostle of the gospel of 3 dimensions. Not so, replied I. The matter is now clear to me, the nature of real space so palpable that methinks I could make a child understand it. Permit me but to descend at this moment and enlighten them.
Not yet, said my guide. The time will come for that. Meantime I must perform my mission. Stay thou there in thy place.
Saying these words, he leaped with great dexterity into the sea, if I may so call it, of Flatland, right in the midst of the ring of councillors.
I come, cried he, to proclaim that there is a land of 3 dimensions.
I could see. Many of the younger councillors start back in manifest horror as the sphere's circular section widened before them, but on a sign from the presiding circle, who showed not the slightest alarm or surprise, 6 isosceles of a low type from 6 different quarters rushed upon the sphere.
We have him, they cried. No, yes, we have him still. Oh!
My lords, said the president to the junior circles of the council, there is not the slightest need for surprise. The secret archives to which I alone have access tell me that a similar occurrence happened on the last 2 millennial commencements. You will, of course, say nothing of these trifles outside the cabinet. Raising his voice, he now summoned the guards. Arrest the policemen. Gag them. You know your duty. After he had consigned to their fate the wretched policemen, ill-fated and unwilling witnesses of a state secret which they were not permitted to reveal, he again addressed the councillors. My lords, the business of the council being concluded, I have only to wish you a happy new year. Before departing, he expressed at some length to the clerk, my excellent but most unfortunate brother, his sincere regret that, in accordance with precedent and for the sake of secrecy, he must condemn him to perpetual imprisonment, but added his satisfaction that unless some mention were made by him of that day's incident, his life would be spared.
Section 19. How, though the sphere showed me other mysteries of Spaceland, I still desired more, and what came of it. When I saw my poor brother led away to imprisonment, I attempted to leap down into the council chamber, desiring to intercede on his behalf, or at least bid him farewell, but I found that I had no motion of my own. It absolutely depended on the volition of my guide, who said in gloomy tones, Heed not thy brother, haply thou shalt have ample time hereafter to condole with him. Follow me.
Once more we ascended into space.
Hitherto, said the sphere, I have shown you naught save plain figures in their interiors. Now I must introduce you to solids, and reveal to you the plan upon which they are constructed. Behold, this multitude of movable square cards. See, I put one on another, not as you suppose, northward of the other, but on the other. Now a second, now a third. See, I am building up a solid by a multitude of squares parallel to one another. Now the solid is complete, being as high as it is long and broad, and we call it a cube.
Pardon me, my lord, replied I, but to my eye the appearance is as of an irregular figure whose inside is laid open to the view. In other words, methinks I see no solid, but a plane such as we infer in Flatland, only of an irregularity which betokens some monstrous criminal to that, so that the very sight of it is painful to my eyes.
True, said the sphere. It appears to you a plane because you are not accustomed to light and shade and perspective, just as in Flatland a hexagon would appear a straight line to one who has not the art of sight recognition, but in reality it is a solid, as you shall learn by the sense of feeling. He then introduced me to the cube, and I found that this marvelous being was indeed no plane, but a solid, and that he was endowed with 6 plane sides and 8 terminal points called solid angles, and I remembered the saying of the sphere that just such a creature as this would be formed by a square moving, in space, parallel to himself. And I rejoiced to think that so insignificant a creature could in some sense be called the progenitor of so illustrious an offspring. But I still could not fully understand the meaning of what my teacher had told me concerning light and shade and perspective, and I did not hesitate to put my difficulties before him. Were I to give the sphere's explanation of these matters, succinct and clear though it was, it would be tedious to an inhabitant of space who knows these things already. Suffice it that by his lucid statements, and by changing the positions of objects and lights, and by allowing me to feel the several objects, and even his own sacred person, he at last made all things clear to me, so that I could now readily distinguish between a circle and a sphere, a plane figure and a solid. This was the climax, the paradise of my strange eventful history. Henceforth I have to relate the story of my miserable fall, most miserable, yet surely most undeserved. For why should the thirst for knowledge be aroused only to be disappointed and punished? My volition shrinks from the painful task of recalling my humiliation, yet like a second Prometheus, I will endure this and worse, if by any means I may arouse in the interiors of plain and solid humanity a spirit of rebellion against the conceit which would limit our dimensions to 2 or 3 or any number short of infinity. Away then with all personal considerations. Let me continue to the end as I began, without further digressions or anticipations, pursuing the plain path of dispassionate history. The exact facts, the exact words, and they are burnt in upon my brain, shall be set down without alteration of an iota, and let my readers judge between me and destiny. The sphere would willingly have continued his lessons by indoctrinating me in the conformation of all regular solids, cylinders, cones, pyramids, pentahedrons, hexahedrons, dodecahedrons, and spheres, but I ventured on to interrupt him. Not that I was wearied of knowledge, on the contrary, I thirsted for yet deeper and fuller draughts than he was offering to me. Pardon me, said I, O thou whom I must no longer address as the perfection of beauty, but let me beg thee to vouchsafe thy servant a sight of thine interior. My what? Thine interior, thy stomach, thy intestines. Whence this ill-timed, impertinent request? And what mean you by saying that I am no longer the perfection of all beauty? My lord, your own wisdom has taught me to aspire to one even more great, more beautiful, and more closely approximate to perfection than yourself, as you yourself, superior to all Flatland forms, combine many circles in one, so doubtless there is one above you who combines many spheres in one supreme existence, surpassing even the solids of Spaceland. And even as we, who are now in space, look down on Flatland and see the insides of all things, so, of a certainty, there is yet above us some higher, purer region, whither thou dost surely purpose to lead me, O thou whom I shall always call, everywhere and in all dimensions, my priest, philosopher, and friend, some yet more spacious space, some more dimensionable dimensionality, from the vantage ground of which we shall look down together upon the revealed insides of solid things, and where thine own intestines and those of thy kindred spheres will lie, exposed to the view of the poor wandering exile from Flatland, to whom so much has already been vouchsafed. Pooh! Stuff! Enough of this trifling. The time is short, and much remains to be done before you are fit to proclaim the gospel of 3 dimensions to your blind, benighted countrymen in Flatland. Nay, gracious teacher, deny me not what I know it is in thy power to perform. Grant me but one glimpse of thine interior, and I am satisfied for ever, remaining henceforth thy docile pupil, thy committed servant, ready to receive all thy teachings and to feed upon the words that fall from thy lips. Well then, to content and silence you, let me say at once, I would show you what you wish if I could, but I cannot. Would you have me turn my stomach inside out to oblige you?
But my lord has shown me the intestines of all my countrymen in the land of 2 dimensions by taking me with him into the land of 3. What therefore more easy than now to take his servant on a second journey into the blessed region of the 4th dimension, where I shall look down with him once more upon this land of 3 dimensions and see the inside of every 3-dimensioned house, the secrets of this solid earth, the treasures of the mines and spaceland, and the intestines of every solid living creature, even of the noble and adorable spheres. But where is this land of 4 dimensions? I know not, but doubtless my teacher knows. Not I. There is no such land. The very idea of it is utterly inconceivable. Not inconceivable, my lord, to me, and therefore still less inconceivable to my master. Nay, I despair not that, even here, in this region of 3 dimensions, your lordship's art may make the 4th dimension visible to me, just as in the land of 2 dimensions my teacher's skill would fain have opened the eyes of his blind servant to the invisible presence of a 3rd dimension, though I saw it not. Let me recall the past. Was I not taught below that when I saw a line and inferred a plane, I in reality saw a 3rd unrecognized dimension, not the same as brightness, called height? And does it not now follow that in this region, when I see a plane and infer a solid, I really see a 4th unrecognized dimension, not the same as color, but existent, though infinitesimal and incapable of measurements? And besides this, there is the argument from analogy of figures. Analogy? Nonsense. What analogy? Your lordship tempts his servant to see whether he remembers the revelations imparted to him. Trifle not with me, my lord. I thirst for more knowledge. Doubtless we cannot see the other higher spaceland now, because we have no eye in our stomachs. But just as there was the realm of Flatland, though that poor puny lineland monarch could neither turn left nor right to discern it, and just as there was, close at hand and touching my frame, the land of 3 dimensions, though I, blind, senseless wretch, had no power to touch it, no eye in my interior to discern it, so of a surety there is a 4th dimension, which my lord perceives with the inner eye of thought, and that it must exist my lord himself has taught me, or can he have forgotten what he himself imparted to his servant? In 1 dimension did not a moving point produce a line with 2 terminal points? In 2 dimension did not a moving line produce a square with 4 terminal points? In 3 dimensions did not a moving square produce, did not this eye of mine behold it, that blessed being a cube with 8 terminal points? And in 4 dimensions shall not a moving cube, alas for analogy, and alas for the progress of truth, if it be not so, shall not, I say, the motion of the divine cube result in a still more divine organization with 16 terminal points? Behold, the infallible confirmation of the series 2, 4, 8, 16. Is not this a geometrical progression? If not this, if I might quote my lord's own words, strictly according to analogy. Again, was I not taught by my lord that as in a line there are 2 bounding points, and in a square there are 4 bounding points, and so in a cube there must be 6 bounding squares? Behold once more the confirming series 2, 4, 6. Is not this an arithmetical progression? And consequently does it not of necessity follow that the more divine offspring of the divine cube in the land of 4 dimensions must have 8 bounding cubes? And is not this also, as my lord has taught me to believe, strictly according to analogy? Oh, my lord, behold, I cast myself in faith upon conjecture, not knowing the facts, and I appeal to your lordship to confirm or deny my logical anticipations. If I am wrong, I yield, and will no longer demand a 4th dimension, but if I am right, my lord will listen to reason. I ask, therefore, is it or is it not the fact that ere now your countrymen also have witnessed the descent of beings of a higher order than their own, entering closed rooms, even as your lordship entered mine, without the opening of doors or windows, and appearing and vanishing at will? On the reply to this question I am ready to stake everything. Deny it, and I am henceforth silent. Only vouchsafe an answer. It is reported so, but men are divided in opinion as to the facts. And even granting the facts, they explain them in different ways, and in any case
However great may be the number of different explanations, no one has adopted or suggested the theory of a fourth dimension. Therefore, pray have done with this trifling, and let us return to business. I was certain of it. I was certain that my anticipations would be fulfilled, and now have patience with me and answer me yet one more question, best of teachers. Those who have thus appeared, no one knows whence, and have returned, no one knows whither. Have they also contracted their sections and vanished somehow into that more spacious space, whither I now entreat you to conduct me? They have vanished, certainly, if they ever appeared, but most people say that these visions arose from the thought, you will not understand me, from the brain, from the perturbed angularity of the seer. Say they so? Oh, believe them not, or, if it indeed be so, that this other space is really Thoughtland. Then take me to that blessed region where I in thought shall see the inside of all solid things. There, before my ravished eye, a cube moving in some altogether new direction, but strictly according to analogy, so as to make every particle of his interior pass through a new kind of space with a wake of its own, shall create a still more perfect perfection than himself, with 16 terminal extra solid angles and 8 solid cubes for his perimeter. And once there, shall we stare upward course? In that blessed region of 4 dimensions shall we linger on the threshold of the 5th and not enter therein? Ah, no, let us rather resolve that our ambition shall soar with our corporal ascent. Then, yielding to our intellectual onset, the gates of the 6th dimension shall fly open, after that the 7th, and then an 8th. How long I should have continued, I know not. In vain did the sphere, in his voice of thunder, reiterate his command of silence, and threaten me with the direst penalties if I persisted. Nothing could stem the flood of my ecstatic aspirations. Perhaps I was to blame. But indeed, I was intoxicated with the recent draughts of truth to which he himself had introduced me. However, the end was not long in coming. My words were cut short by a crash outside and a simultaneous crash inside me, which impelled me through space with a velocity that precluded speech. Down, down, down I was rapidly descending, and I knew the return to Flatland was my doom. One glimpse, one last and never to be forgotten glimpse I had of that dull, level wilderness, which was now to become my universe again, spread out before my eyes, then a darkness, then final, all-consummating thunder peal, and when I came to myself I was once more a common, creeping square in my study at home, listening to the peace cry of my approaching wife. And that is where we're going to leave off today. I'm going to go ahead, if you stay on the channel for just a second, I'm going to go ahead and raid ATL by Night channel so that we can get them views on Bite Notes, because that is airing as of 6 minutes ago. Thanks for joining me. I hope you'll join me Sunday. I thought I would finish this today. I was wrong. We will finish it Sunday. Good night.